The summer of 1985 was the hottest Los Angeles had seen in 100 years, temperatures pushing into the hundreds. Nights that never cooled down, a city of millions trying to sleep in air that felt like a blanket pulled too tight. And in that heat, Los Angeles did what it had always done. It left its windows open, left its doors unlocked. Because this was Los Angeles, a city that had survived earthquakes, a city that had survived riots, a city that believed, genuinely believed, that nothing could make it afraid of its own streets. It was wrong. Between March and August of 1985, 13 people were murdered in their own homes. 5 more barely escaped with their lives. A dozen endured attacks so brutal that investigators struggled to find language for what they were looking at. And an entire city of 10 million people changed the way it lived, permanently. Not because of a war, not because of a natural disaster, because of one man. One man nobody could identify. One man nobody could locate. One man who moved through Los Angeles like he owned it, while the city that prided itself on never looking over its shoulder started looking over its shoulder every single night. This is the story of the summer Los Angeles lost something it never fully got back. Not just safety, something harder to name than that. The feeling that the city was yours, that your home was yours, that the dark outside your window was just dark. This isn't a story about a serial killer. Every city has had those. This is a story about what happens to a city when fear becomes the air it breathes. When 10 million people wake up one morning and realize that the rules they lived by, leave your windows open, trust your neighbors, sleep without a gun on your nightstand, no longer apply. Los Angeles in the summer of 1985 didn't just encounter Richard Ramirez. It encountered something it had never felt before, its own vulnerability. And that was the summer Los Angeles locked its doors for the first time. Los Angeles in 1985 was a city that didn't know how to be afraid. Not like this. It had its problems. Gang violence in South Central. Poverty in neighborhoods the rest of the city preferred not to think about. The usual friction of a sprawling metropolis of 10 million people crammed into a basin between the mountains and the sea. But the suburbs were different. The suburbs of Los Angeles in 1985 operated on a specific kind of trust. The trust that your neighborhood was your neighborhood, that the people on your block were your people, that the darkness outside your window at night was just darkness. People left their doors unlocked, not because they were careless, because it had never occurred to them to be otherwise. Windows stayed open through the night because the nights were warm and the streets were quiet, and nothing had ever come through those windows that wasn't welcome. Children played outside until it got dark. Elderly couples slept with their back doors open to catch the breeze. Families in Monrovia and Arcadia and Sierra Madre and Whittier lived the specific quiet life that people moved to Los Angeles suburbs to find. Away from the noise, away from the danger. Safe. That word meant something specific in those neighborhoods. Safe meant your block, your house, your routine. It meant knowing your neighbors well enough to wave from the driveway. It meant leaving for work in the morning without checking the locks because you hadn't checked the locks in years. This was the texture of Los Angeles suburban life in the spring of 1985. Ordinary, comfortable, unguarded in the way that only people who have never needed to guard themselves can be. Nobody had given them a reason to be otherwise. Not yet. What made Los Angeles uniquely vulnerable wasn't poverty, or crime, or social breakdown. It was the opposite. It was the confidence of a city that had grown large and prosperous, and comfortable enough to stop paying attention. 10 million people spread across hundreds of square miles of neighborhoods that felt insulated from the kind of thing that happened somewhere else. Not here. Not in these streets. Not to these people. That confidence was about to be tested in a way nobody saw coming. and it would be tested not by something vast and systemic, but by one man, moving quietly through neighborhoods that had left their doors open for him. March 17th, 1985, a Sunday night. 10:40 p.m., Detective Gil Carrillo of the LA County Sheriff's Department got the call. He was the youngest member of the homicide squad, 34 years old, already worked over 100 murder cases. He climbed out of bed expecting another routine Monday morning murder. He had no idea what he was walking into. Rosemead, a quiet residential neighborhood in the eastern suburbs of Los Angeles. 2 women, roommates, coming home from a night out. 34-year-old Dale Okazaki had been unloading groceries in the kitchen when a man walked in and shot her in the forehead where she stood. Her 22-year-old roommate, Maria Hernandez, had been shot at point-blank range in the driveway. She survived. A freak stroke of luck. Her keys deflected the bullet at the last possible moment. Maria Hernandez was one of the very few people who saw that face and lived to tell about it. What she described to investigators stayed with Carrillo. The man wore all black. He had very scary eyes. And he had a smell. Not body odor. Something else. Almost like a dead body. Left behind at the scene. An AC/DC highway to hell cap. It seemed like nothing at the time. It would matter later. 30 minutes after Dale Okazaki was shot dead in her kitchen, the same gun appeared again, half a mile away in Monterey Park. 30-year-old law student Cy Leon Yu had been forced off the road by another driver, shot twice in the chest at close range. She died at the scene. 2 separate attacks. Same weapon. Same night. Same general area. Carrillo felt something shift. This wasn't routine. 8 days later, the bodies of Vincent and Maxine Zazzara were discovered in their home in Whittier. Shot dead. But this time, something was different. Something that made even experienced investigators stop and look away. Maxine Zazzara's eyes had been removed, taken. Whatever this was, it wasn't something Los Angeles had seen before. Carrillo was now certain. This wasn't a series of unconnected crimes. This was one person, moving through the suburbs of Los Angeles, choosing randomly, killing without pattern. And nobody in the city knew his name. Nobody knew his face. Nobody knew where he would appear next. The FBI had a theory about serial killers. They operated in patterns. Same weapon. Same type of victim. Same method. Same geography. You study enough cases, you build a profile. You build a profile, you narrow the search. You narrow the search, you find the man. That theory was about to fall apart completely. April 15th, a couple in their mid-60s, shot and beaten in their home. The wife restrained with thumb cuffs, terrorized, raped, but left alive. May 30th, a 41-year-old woman in Burbank, raped while her 12-year-old son was handcuffed in a closet. June 27th, a 28-year-old teacher in Arcadia, throat cut so deeply it felt personal. July 2nd, a 75-year-old woman, same neighborhood, beaten, throat cut, same method, different victim entirely. The weapons changed constantly. Handguns, knives, a tire iron, a hammer, his fists. The victims had nothing in common. Young women, elderly couples, a teenager beaten in her own bed while her parents slept down the hall, an 8-year-old boy. There was no neighborhood he avoided, no type of person he preferred, no consistent signature that investigators could isolate and build a case around. The only consistency was his inconsistency. Carrillo pushed his theory to anyone who would listen. One man. All of it. One man responsible for crimes that spanned age groups, neighborhoods, weapon types, and methods in ways that defied every existing framework for understanding serial murder. His colleagues pushed back. Psychologists from UCLA told him he was wrong. One man was not capable of the range of behavior they were documenting, but Carrillo had something the psychologists didn't. He had been at the crime scenes. He had seen the shoe print, a single Avia sneaker, size 11.5, found at scene after scene after scene. As it turned out, only one pair of that specific shoe in that specific size had ever been sold in Los Angeles. One pair, one city, one killer. By the time that was confirmed publicly, the attacks had continued for 4 months, 13 neighborhoods, victims ranging from 8 years old to 75, and still nobody in Los Angeles knew his name. Nobody knew his face. The city was living alongside something it couldn't see, or predict, or prepare for. And then in July, the press found out. The mood of Los Angeles in July 1985 was described by those who lived through it as a thick cloud, hanging over everything, heavy, suffocating, like the heat itself had taken on a different quality, something darker, something that didn't lift when the sun went down. The newspapers had confirmed what people had already started to feel. A serial killer was loose in Los Angeles. Nobody knew who he was. Nobody knew where he lived. Nobody knew where he would appear next, and the city responded the only way it knew how. It started trying to protect itself. Gun stores across Los Angeles County reported lines around the block. People who had never owned a firearm in their lives, standing in the heat waiting to buy one. Hardware stores sold out of deadbolts, window locks, security bars. Alarm companies couldn't keep up with demand. Guard dog sales surged across the county. People who had slept with their back doors open for 20 years were suddenly sleeping with a loaded weapon on the nightstand. And the windows stayed closed. In the hottest summer Los Angeles had seen in 100 years, people sweltered inside sealed houses rather than open a window at night. One resident described it simply: "We sweltered in our house every night because I was afraid someone would come in and kill me." That was life in Los Angeles in the summer of 1985. Sweating in the dark, behind locked doors, listening. The fear reached into places you wouldn't expect. Gil Carrillo, the homicide detective hunting the killer, came home one night to find his own house empty. His wife Pearl had taken their 3 children and left, not to another city, just to her in-law's house, a few miles away, because she was too afraid to sleep in her own home. The man whose entire job was catching this killer couldn't keep his own family from being consumed by the fear he was trying to stop. His 13-year-old daughter had been found crying in her bedroom. When her mother asked what was wrong, she said she just wanted her dad back. She just wanted it to be over. That's what one man did to Los Angeles that summer. He didn't just kill 13 people. He reached into the homes of 10 million others, into bedrooms, into nightstands, into the quiet moment before sleep when a city that had never been afraid found itself lying awake in the dark, listening to sounds it had never listened for before. The city had locked its doors for the first time because of one man. The locks didn't stop him. The guard dogs didn't stop him. The guns on the nightstands didn't stop him. Through July and into August of 1985, Richard Ramirez kept moving. He came through pet doors, through unlocked garage windows, through front doors left open for 30 seconds while someone stepped outside. Every time the city thought it had found a way to feel safe again, he found a way through. And the attacks continued. July 20th, Glendale. A couple shot in their home. The husband killed in his sleep. The wife beaten and sexually assaulted. Forced to swear her love for Satan, while her husband's body lay beside her. Their young son assaulted in the same house. The same night, Ramirez drove to Sun Valley. Another couple. Another husband killed. Another wife terrorized. 2 attacks. One night. The city that had spent weeks trying to feel safe woke up to the news that he had struck twice while it slept. Carrillo hadn't slept properly in months. He was working 20-hour shifts, sometimes longer. coming home to an empty house, his family gone. A loaded gun on the nightstand where his wife used to sleep. One night, he woke up in the middle of the night, convinced Ramirez was inside his house. He grabbed his weapon, cleared every room, moving through his own home in the dark, like he was working a crime scene. It was nothing. But that moment, a trained homicide detective searching his own house for a killer at 3 in the morning said everything about what Los Angeles had become that summer. Then Ramirez did something that made the entire state feel exposed. He left Los Angeles, mid-August. San Francisco. An elderly Taiwanese couple shot in their home. A pentagram drawn on the bedroom wall in lipstick. The words, "Jack the Knife," written underneath. No Californian felt safe anymore. The killer wasn't contained to one county. He wasn't contained to one city. He was moving freely through the state, and nobody could predict where he would surface next. The investigators had almost nothing. No name, no photograph, no biological evidence, just a shoe print and a fingerprint on a rearview mirror that nobody had processed yet. The leads were thinning. The pressure was suffocating. And somewhere out there. Richard Ramirez was already thinking about his next address. By late August 1985, Los Angeles had been living like this for 5 months. 5 months of locked doors. 5 months of sealed windows in the heat. 5 months of gun stores and deadbolts and guard dogs and loaded weapons on nightstands. 5 months of a city waiting for something it couldn't see coming. And still he hadn't been caught. The investigators were exhausted. The leads were almost gone. Ramirez was still moving, still choosing, still untouchable. Nobody inside that task force could have predicted what was about to break the case wide open. Not a detective, not a tip from an informant. Not years of investigative work finally paying off. A 13-year-old boy who couldn't sleep on his birthday. His name was James Romero. It was late, 12:30 in the morning. He was in the garage cleaning his new birthday bike when a car drove slowly past his house. For just a moment, the driver and the boy locked eyes. James Romero wrote down the license plate number. That plate number led investigators to an abandoned orange Toyota. And on the rearview mirror of that Toyota, a single fingerprint. At the same time, a piece of jewelry stolen from a San Francisco victim had changed hands. A burglar gave it to a friend. The friend gave it to a girlfriend. The girlfriend saw it in the newspaper and ran to the police. The name they provided was Richard Ramirez. When investigators fed that name and that fingerprint into their system, everything matched. They had him. The decision was made immediately. Release the photograph. Get it to every newspaper, every television station, every corner of the city that had been living in fear for 5 months. The next morning, Richard Ramirez's face was on the front page of every newspaper in Los Angeles. The only problem: Ramirez had left town days earlier. He had no idea he had been identified. And on the morning of August 29, 1985, he stepped off a bus in Los Angeles, walked into a convenience store, and noticed people were staring at him. He looked down at the newspapers on the counter, every single one. His face. He ran, through yards, over fences, through the streets of East Los Angeles, a neighborhood that knew exactly who he was. A neighborhood that had been afraid long enough. Residents poured out of their homes, armed with fence posts, with bare hands, with 5 months of fear turning into something else entirely. They chased him, caught him, and were beating him to death on Hubbard Street when the police arrived and pulled them off. It was the police that saved Richard Ramirez that day. From the city he had spent 5 months terrorizing. When the helicopter circling above confirmed his identity over the PA system, the neighbors who had gathered on the street started to clap, not cheering, just clapping, the quiet release of something that had been held too long. The cloud that had hung over Los Angeles all summer finally began to lift. Richard Ramirez was convicted on September 20th, 1989. 13 counts of murder, 30 additional felonies, sentenced to death. He died on death row in 2013, never once expressing remorse for a single thing he had done. But the story of that summer isn't really about what happened to Richard Ramirez. It's about what happened to Los Angeles. The gun stores eventually restocked. The alarm companies caught up with demand. The hardware stores filled their shelves with deadbolts again. But something in the city had shifted permanently. The easy, unguarded confidence of a city that had never needed to look over its shoulder was gone. People who swore they would never sleep with a weapon in the house kept the weapon. People who had never once thought about whether their windows were locked before bed still check them to this day. The Night Stalker didn't just kill 13 people. He killed something in the city itself, the specific innocence of a place that had never had a reason to be afraid of the dark. Los Angeles has faced bigger threats since 1985. Larger disasters, more widespread destruction. But there is something uniquely personal about what happened that summer. Because it wasn't an earthquake or a riot or a wildfire. It was one man, moving quietly through neighborhoods that had left their doors open for him, and a city of 10 million people who learned for the first time that safety was never something you could take for granted. Not even in Los Angeles, not even in the sun. Which moment in Los Angeles history should we uncover next? Drop it in the comments.